So, I want you to imagine for a second that you are digging in the sand.
Okay.
You're in the middle of this vast, just completely unforgiving desert, and you hit something hard, you dig a little deeper, and you pull out a box. Inside that box, you find a manual.
I'm intrigued. What kind of manual are we talking about here?
It is incredibly detailed. I mean, it tells you exactly where the local water wells are hidden. It tells you how to negotiate with the specific clans living over the next dune.
Right.
It tells you how to saddle a camel, how to divide the spoils after you raid a caravan, and even what to eat to survive the heat. It is basically the perfect survival guide for that specific place at that exact time in history.
So it's a time capsule, a priceless historical artifact.
Exactly. It's incredibly valuable. But now imagine someone takes that same manual, travels through time and space, and hands it to a guy working in a high-rise in Tokyo or a coffee shop in New York City in 2025. And they say to him, "This is the eternal, unchanging guide for the entire universe. You have to follow it to the letter, every rule about camels and raiding, or you will suffer for eternity."
And that right there is the friction. That is the exact tension we are exploring in today's deep dive. We are looking at the Quran. And I really want to stress this because this is the absolute key for our conversation today. We are not doing theology here.
Right.
We aren't looking at this through a devotional lens.
Yeah, we want to strip all that away. We want to strip away the fear of hellfire, the centuries of tradition, the reverence. We want to look at the actual mechanics of the text. We want to treat it as an artifact.
Very human artifact.
Yeah.
Because when you look at it that way, when you read it as an anthropologist instead of a believer, you don't see some cosmic voice echoing from outside of time and space.
No, you see fingerprints.
Exactly. You see the very clear fingerprints of a man, and you see the very specific pragmatic concerns of 7th century Arabia. You see tribal statecrafting, you see local poetry, and you see political management.
Well, so that is our mission today. We are going to deconstruct those fingerprints. We want to see how a text that claims to be about the divine is actually, well, a masterclass in human leadership and coalition building.
It really is a masterclass.
And I want to start with something tangible, something that millions of people around the world participate in every single year. Let's talk about the rebranding of ritual. I want to talk about Ramadan.
Oh, it's the perfect place to start because the modern narrative around Ramadan has completely obscured the historical and biological reality of what it actually is.
Yeah. I mean, if you go on social media right now during the fast, what do you see?
It's endless. You see influencers talking about autophagy.
Yes. Autophagy and detoxing.
Exactly. It's pitched as this biohacking medical miracle. It's framed as intermittent fasting with a spiritual twist.
But we have to be really precise about the biology here, right? Because intermittent fasting, as we know it in the wellness world, is just caloric restriction. You skip breakfast, you drink your black coffee, you drink water.
Right. But Ramadan is dry fasting.
Dry fasting. No water, no liquids at all.
For 12, 15, sometimes 18 hours a day, depending on where you are on the globe and what season it is.
And that is the kicker. From a purely physiological standpoint, denying the body water is a completely different beast than just skipping a meal.
It absolutely is. You have to remember, in the 7th century, health was basically binary. You were either upright and fighting, or you were dying in a tent. They didn't have the concept of cumulative organ damage.
But today, we do. We know about kidney stones. We know that chronic dehydration severely stresses the renal system. We know about the complications it causes for people with type 2 diabetes.
So it begs a really profound Socratic question. If this command actually comes from a universal, all-knowing deity, the being who literally designed the human kidney, why mandate a universal practice that risks damaging it?
Right. And let's even zoom out from the individual to the macro level. Why mandate a practice that causes a massive drop in economic productivity?
The numbers on that are staggering.
They really are. You see a 35 to 50% drop in economic productivity in Muslim-majority nations during that month. It effectively shuts down normal civilization for 30 days.
Now, if you're an omniscient being designing a system for universal human flourishing, you probably wouldn't include a mandatory month where everyone is too dehydrated to work.
You definitely wouldn't. Unless, and this is where the anthropology comes in, unless the goal wasn't health or productivity at all.
Exactly. Unless the goal was a tribal endurance test. It's about cohesion.
And the fascinating thing I realized while we were preparing for this deep dive is that it wasn't even a unique or new test. The roots of this go way, way back.
They do. One of the most interesting clues is the actual word itself. The name of the month, Ramadan.
The etymology is basically a smoking gun.
It really is. The root is aramad, which literally translates to scorching heat or burning ground.
Which implies that originally this wasn't a lunar month that drifted randomly through the seasons like it does today. I mean, right now, sometimes Ramadan is in the dead of winter, sometimes it's in the spring.
But if it's explicitly named scorching heat, it must have originally been a fixed solar event.
A summer festival. A literal heat endurance test in the desert.
The shifting lunar calendar came later, likely as a political move to differentiate the new Muslim community from the Jewish lunisolar calendar, which used intercalation, adding leap months to keep their feasts in the correct seasons.
So the practice itself, the actual act of dry fasting, wasn't a brand new download from heaven.
Not at all. This is what we call rebranding. Look at the Sabians. They were a pre-Islamic sect in Iraq and Syria at the time. They were already doing a 30-day fast honoring the moon.
Wow.
And the pagans in Mecca had their own fasting traditions, specifically on the day of Ashura. Muhammad didn't invent these rituals out of thin air. He consolidated them.
It's actually political genius if you think about it. You don't go to a group of deeply traditional tribes and say, stop everything you know and do this completely weird, alien new thing.
No, they'd reject you immediately.
Right. Instead, you say, keep doing what you're already doing, keep fasting, keep circling the Kaaba, but now do it for my God, do it for our new tribe.
It creates an instant shared identity. It says, we are the tribe that fasts. It draws a hard line between the U.S. and the them. But this leads to a really fascinating social dynamic. I call it the gossip paradox.
Oh, I love this concept because it feels so incredibly modern. If you look at the text itself, like Surah 49.11, it's actually very high-minded.
It is. It explicitly condemns spying on one another.
Yeah.
It condemns backbiting. It uses this really visceral imagery, saying that gossiping about your brother is like eating his dead flesh.
High moral ground, absolutely. But then you look at the mechanics of the ritual he actually instituted. The structure of Ramadan encourages the exact opposite behavior.
It does. It turns the entire community into a surveillance state.
Because everyone is watching everyone else. You see it today. People are constantly looking out the corner of their eye. Is he eating? Did she just sneak a sip of water?
It becomes a highly performative month. The social pressure creates this dynamic of the haram police. You have people who might never step foot in a mosque, who might drink alcohol the other 11 months of the year, but suddenly during Ramadan they become these hyper-vigilant enforcers of tribal rule.
Because it prioritizes public compliance over private spirituality.
Which is incredibly useful for a state builder. Look, loyalty is visible. Private morality is invisible. If I am building a military coalition in the harsh desert, I need to know exactly who is loyal enough to starve with me.
Right.
I don't really care if they are deeply good on the inside. I care if they follow my orders when it hurts.
That is just a devastating reframing. It's a loyalty test.
A very effective one.
Okay, speaking of loyalty and establishing authority, I want to pivot to the internal logic of the text itself. Because there is a logical trap in the Quran that I think a lot of people just gloss over. But once you see it, you really can't unsee it. Let's call it the Muhammad dilemma.
This is a fantastic logic puzzle. And it's a direct result of that exact desire for authority we were just talking about. In the early parts of his career, the author of the text is the new kid on the block. He needs credibility badly. So what does he do?
He name drops.
He name drops constantly. He references the big guys of the era, the Torah and the Gospel.
He calls them light and guidance and the criterion. He literally tells the Christians and the Jews of his time to judge by their own books.
He essentially says, look, if you don't believe me, go check the previous scriptures. I am just confirming what is already in them.
Okay, so here's the trap. Let me use an analogy. Imagine I'm applying for a really high-level job. And on my resume, I list you as my primary reference.
Okay, I'm following.
I tell the employer, go ask my expert friend. He will vouch for everything I'm saying. He knows the absolute truth about my background. So the employer calls you and you say, actually, everything that guy just told you is wrong. His resume is fake. He's never worked a day in this field.
Well, then you definitely don't get the job.
No, my credibility is completely destroyed. And why? Because I cited a source as authoritative that explicitly contradicts my own claims.
And that is exactly what happens with the Quran. It cites the Torah and the Gospel as valid, preserved truth. But the Torah and the Gospel fundamentally contradict the Quran's core theology.
Right, specifically regarding Jesus.
Yes. The Gospel makes it very clear that Jesus is the Son of God and that he died on the cross. The Quran explicitly says Jesus is not the Son of God and did not die on the cross.
But the Quran also says the Gospel is the preserved word of God.
So you are totally stuck in a logical paradox. Either the previous books are true, in which case the Quran is false because it contradicts them, or,
Or we get the standard apologetic response, which is, well, the previous books were corrupted. They were changed by men over time.
right, that's the common defense.
Yeah.
But that defense fails basic chronology.
Walk us through that. Why does it fail?
Think about the timeline. If the Torah and the Gospel were already corrupted before Muhammad's time, which they would have to be to contain the crucifixion story, then the Quran is still false.
Because why would it confirm them?
Exactly. Why would an all-knowing God tell people in the 7th century to look for guidance in books that he knew were already full of lies? He validates them in the present tense. He says, let the people of the gospel judge by what God has revealed therein.
Going back to the resume analogy, it would be like me telling that employer to call you for a reference, even though I know for a fact you've been a pathological liar for 20 years.
It makes absolutely no sense for a divine being, but it makes perfect sense for a human being. It implies the author wasn't an omniscient deity who knew the complex textual history of the Bible.
It paints a picture of a man who understood the cultural prestige of the Judeo-Christian tradition.
Precisely. He knew they were respected as the people of the book. He wanted to attach his new fledgling movement to that ancient legitimacy, but he lacked deep first-hand familiarity with the actual contents of those books.
He didn't realize he was stepping on a massive theological landmine. He just assumed they were all telling the exact same story, and by the time he or his followers realized they weren't, the claim was already cemented in the text.
It feels like a very human miscalculation. It is the kind of error a statesman makes when he's trying to build a broad coalition. It is not the kind of error the creator of the universe makes.
And speaking of that human feeling, I really want to talk about the voice of the text itself, the actual sound of it, because when we read it translated into English, it can feel a bit dry, almost like a legal code.
But in the original Arabic, especially the early chapters from Mecca, it doesn't sound like a legal code at all. It sounds like a very specific, highly stylized type of poetry.
Yes, it's poetry.
Specifically, it's a style called sashi. It's rhymed prose. It's highly rhythmic, it's hypnotic, and the pacing is very intense.
But here's the fascinating part. This wasn't unique to the Quran. The author didn't invent this style.
Far from it. This was the exact medium of the Quhan.
The Quhan. Explain who they were.
They were the soothsayers, the fortune tellers and mystics of pre-Islamic Arabia. If you lost a camel, or if you wanted to know if your tribe should go to war, you went to a kahin.
And he wouldn't just give you a straight yes or no answer, right?
No, never. He would go into a trance state and speak in these cryptic, rhythmic, escalating oaths. He would say things like, by the snorting horses, by the night when it falls, by the star when it sets.
Which are exact structures found in the Quran.
Identical structures. The text adopts the aesthetic frequency of the local magic. Now, you really have to ask yourself a basic question here. Why would the creator of the universe, the master of all dimensions, choose the specific, stylized poetic format of a 7th century Bedouin fortune teller to convey eternal, universal laws?
It's just wild to think about. It would be like if God decided to reveal a brand new eternal scripture in New York City today, and he chose to deliver the entire message in mumble rap.
That is a very vivid image, but yes, that is exactly what it is. It appeals to the specific aesthetic ear of that exact local audience. And what's interesting is that the text hourly admits this.
It does. It repeatedly insists, we have made this in clear Arabic so that you people may understand.
It constantly emphasizes its own local nature. It anchors God to a specific location and a specific culture.
It really anchors God to the geography itself. Just look at the descriptions of paradise.
Oh, the imagery of heaven and hell is the biggest giveaway. What is the ultimate reward for a believer in the Quran?
It's cool shade.
Cool shade, running water, lush gardens, and rivers of non-intoxicating wine.
Which is exactly what you would dream of if you were stuck in the middle of a scorching, arid desert.
Precisely. If this book had been revealed to a prophet in Norway or Alaska, hell wouldn't be a blazing fire. Hell would be eternal freezing ice. And paradise would be a warm, crackling hearth.
The imagery is completely bound by the physical geography of the author. It is a desert god speaking to desert people about desert problems.
And solving those problems with very specific rules. Which brings us to the part of the text that feels the most, well, convenient.
The statecrafting. Because as you read through the chronological order of the text, moving from the early days in Mecca to the later years in Medina, the rules shift dramatically based on what the prophet needed at that exact moment in time.
This is where we see the transition from spiritual prophet to political statesmen. When Muhammad is in Mecca, he's a minority. He has no real power. And the verses reflect that. They are spiritual, poetic, and relatively peaceful. Things like, to you your religion, to me mine.
But then he moves to Medina.
He gains power. He becomes the head of an army and a state. And suddenly the divine revelations become less about cosmic truth and much more about administrative fixes.
The Zainab incident is the one that really stopped me in my tracks.
It is the absolute smoking gun for statecrafting. We really have to explain the context here for the listeners because it's just wild.
So Muhammad wanted to marry a woman named Zainab, but there was a major problem. She was the recently divorced wife of his adopted son, Zayd.
And we have to understand that in Arab culture at the time, adoption wasn't just a legal formality. It was biologically binding in their eyes. An adopted son was treated exactly like a blood son.
So marrying your adopted son's ex-wife was viewed as literal incest.
Exactly. It was a massive social taboo, a huge scandal that could have ruined his authority.
So he was totally stuck. He clearly wanted the marriage, but the established social law of his own people forbade it.
Until, very conveniently, a new revelation comes down, Surah 33, and it essentially says, God has decreed that adopted sons are not real sons. Adoption is a legal fiction. Therefore, the taboo is lifted, and you can marry her.
That is just incredibly specific. You're telling me the creator of the universe, being managing billions of galaxies, took time out of running the cosmos just to alter human family law so one specific man could marry the exact woman he wanted?
It is pure political utility. It solves a very personal, very immediate problem for the leader of the tribe.
And once you start looking for these convenient verses, you see them everywhere, like the domestic management verses.
The dinner guests.
Yes. Surah 33.53. God literally tells the believers, do not linger at the prophet's house after dinner.
Wait, so God is basically acting as a bouncer.
Literally. The verse essentially says, when you have finished eating, disperse. This annoys the prophet, and he's too shy to tell you to leave, but God is not shy of the truth.
I mean, look, I get it. Guests who won't leave are annoying. We've all been there at a dinner party.
Right. But does that belong in an eternal universal canon alongside thou shalt not kill?
It does if that canon is actually the diary in the administrative rulebook of a community leader. It solves a deeply personal friction for the man in charge, just like the spoils of war chapter.
Surah 8, Al-Anfal.
Yes. It creates highly specific rules for dividing military loot. Or Surah 9, which conveniently grants permission to break treaties with opposing tribes.
That's the shift that really gets me. The tone completely flips. It goes from peace to you to kill them wherever you find them, exactly when the Muslim army becomes strong enough to actually do it.
Because these aren't abstract, timeless ethics. They are military orders for a specific campaign. If you view the text as a collection of executive orders from a 7th century general, every single contradiction suddenly makes perfect sense. The rules evolve as the situation on the ground evolves.
So when we look at the character of God in this text, who are we actually seeing? Because the text constantly describes God as merciful and compassionate, but then it uses some very interesting descriptors.
One that always stands out to me is the word makara. God calls himself the best of schemers.
Schemers. That is a loaded word.
It implies cunning, it implies deception, it implies outwitting an opponent through trickery.
Which, again, is a fantastic trait for a tribal chieftain. If you're going into battle, you absolutely want your human leader to be a step ahead of the enemy.
Exactly. A chieftain needs to be a schemer to survive. But a cosmic deity, who exactly is he scheming against?
Right, he controls reality itself.
He controls the very atoms in your brain. Scheming implies that you are fighting against an equal, or at least near equal power, that has its own independent agency. It attributes human limitations and human psychology directly to the divine.
And that psychology gets really dark when we talk about the concept of free will. This is the part that always trips me up logically. The text says God deliberately seals the hearts of disbelievers.
Surah 2.7, he blinds them. He puts a literal veil over their eyes and ears. It explicitly says he leads astray whomever he wills.
And then after blinding them, he punishes them for not seeing.
He tortures them eternally for failing a test that he actively prevented them from passing.
That just sounds rigged.
It is entirely rigged. It completely undermines the whole theological concept of life as moral test.
Let me use another analogy. If a teacher blindfolds a student, spins them around, and then expels them for not being able to read the blackboard, that's not a test.
No, that's a demonstration of absolute power. It reads exactly like a capricious tribal ruler deciding who is in his favor and who is out, based purely on loyalty rather than moral agency.
And the descriptions of the punishments for those who are out, they are insanely vivid.
Graphic. Skins being burned off and then magically replaced just so they can be burned off again. Molten brass being poured down people's throats.
It is purely fear-based governance.
It reflects the absolute limits of the 7th century imagination regarding retribution. It's essentially saying, if you betray the tribe, this is the worst physical agony we can imagine inflicting on you. It's designed to keep the ranks strictly in line.
Before we wrap up today, I want to touch briefly on the physical world, because we hear a lot in modern debates about the so-called scientific miracles hidden in the text. But when you strip away the retroactive modern reinterpretations...
You just see a 7th century worldview, plain and simple.
Give me a specific example.
Look at the mountains. The Quran repeatedly describes mountains as pegs driven into the earth to keep it from shaking, to keep it stable and flat.
Which we know, geologically, is the exact opposite of the truth. Mountains are formed where the earth is already shaking. They are the result of tectonic plates violently smashing into each other.
Right. They don't stop earthquakes. They are the physical evidence of them.
Or look at the sky.
It's described as a canopy, a solid roof or dome that God literally holds up with invisible pillars so it doesn't fall and crush us. That is a very specific, pre-scientific, flat earth view of the cosmos.
And what about embryology? That's one you hear cited a lot.
The text says humans are made from a clot of blood, or from clay. It completely ignores the existence of the female ovum. It describes reproduction exactly how a 7th century farmer understood it. The male seed is planted in the female field. The field is just soil. It doesn't contribute any genetic material.
It's just so clearly of its time. So when we pull all these threads together, the rebranded pagan rituals like Ramadan, the local poetry style of the soothsayers, the highly convenient changes to marriage laws, the military manuals for dividing loot, the flat earth geology, what are we actually left with?
Honestly, we are left with a masterpiece.
A masterpiece.
Yes, but a strictly human one. It is an absolute masterpiece of state building. If you step back and think about what this text actually achieved historically, it's staggering. It managed to unite warring, disparate tribes who had been slaughtering each other for centuries over minor water rights and blood feuds.
And it fused them into a superorganism.
A superorganism that conquered half the known world within a single century.
It provided them with a unified legal code, a distinct social identity, and a divine cause.
It worked brilliantly for that specific time. It solved 7th century problems with very effective 7th century solutions. The friction, the violence, the confusion, the cognitive dissonance we see today arises when we try to force those specific 7th century solutions onto 21st century problems.
Right. We're basically trying to run a massive quantum computer using a manual that was written for a camel caravan.
That is the perfect analogy.
Yeah.
And that is exactly why the context argument, which apologists use all the time to defend the violent verses, is actually a massive double-edged sword.
How so? Unpack that for us.
Because if you say, well, you have to understand the specific context of 7th century tribal warfare to explain why the text says to kill the unbelievers, you are implicitly admitting that the text is not timeless.
Ah.
You are admitting it is bound by its history. You are admitting it is an artifact of a bygone era.
That makes total sense. So here's the final thought I want to leave everyone listening with today. The argument from authority.
That really is the core issue of this whole discussion. Does the Quran work today because its arguments are undeniably true, moral, and universally applicable on their own merit? Does it actually stand up to philosophical scrutiny?
Or does it work simply because it says, I am God and I said so, and if you disagree, I will burn you forever?
If you strip away the fear of hell, if you remove the intense social pressure to conform to the tribe, and you ignore the because I said so defense.
If you just look at the actual words written in that manual we dug up from the desert sand, what is actually left to follow?
That is the uncomfortable question every single reader has to answer for themselves.
And I think that is exactly where we will leave our deep dive today. Thank you so much for exploring this artifact with us.
It was a pleasure. Thank you.